Toddler rejects her name, claimed she was a man who vanished in 1920s Europe. Asterisk when 2-year-old Emma Fisher first refused to answer to her name, insisting instead that she was Heinrich, and speaking in broken German phrases her American parents had never heard before. They assumed it was typical toddler defiance. But when their daughter began describing memories of wearing man clothes and working with the big machines that make noise, speaking with a distinctly masculine mannerism that seemed impossible for a child barely out of diapers, Sarah and David Fisher realized they were witnessing something that defied all rational explanation. Living in suburban Minneapolis, thousands of miles from Europe, Emma had never been exposed to German culture or language. Yet here she was, rejecting dolls in favor of toy tools, walking with a swagger that seemed borrowed from another era, and crying inconsolably about being trapped in the wrong body, with the existential anguish of someone who had lived an entire lifetime as someone else. When she began drawing mechanical blueprints with startling precision, and speaking of the factory by the river where the bad men came, her parents knew they were confronting a mystery that would lead them deep into the shadows of 1920s European history. Asterisk if stories that challenge everything we think we know about identity and memory captivate you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. You're about to discover something that will make you question the very nature of who we are. Part 1. The INC Diente the morning of March 3, 2024. Started like any other in the Fisher household in suburban Minneapolis. Sarah was preparing breakfast while 2-year-old Emma played with her toys in the living room, babbling in the mixture of words and sounds typical of toddlers learning to speak. David was getting ready for his job at the tech company downtown, the familiar routine of family life proceeding without incident. Emma, time for breakfast, sweetie, Sarah called from the kitchen. But instead of her usual enthusiastic response, Emma looked up from her toys with an expression of confusion and what appeared to be mild irritation. "9 Emma," she said, her small voice carrying an accent that made Sarah pause. "Ich bin Heinrich." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Emma had never been exposed to German language, and her pronunciation was surprisingly accurate for a child who had just begun forming coherent sentences in English. The family had no German heritage, and their small town offered no international language programs for toddlers. "Emma, honey, what did you say?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside her daughter. "Heinrich," the child repeated, pointing to her chest with the confidence of someone correcting an obvious mistake. "Heinrich Muller, not Emma. Emma is ... She paused, searching for words in her limited vocabulary. "Emma is wrong name." The statement was delivered with a conviction that seemed far beyond a 2-year-old's typical assertions. Emma's posture had changed, her small shoulders set with a masculine confidence that was startling to observe. She stood with her feet planted wide, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that seemed borrowed from an adult male. When David entered the kitchen, Sarah described the incident, but he initially dismissed it as typical toddler behavior. "Kids go through phases," he said, pouring his coffee. "She's probably heard German on TV or something." But as the morning progressed, Emma's behavior became increasingly unsettling. She rejected her usual breakfast, asking instead for Schwarzbrot und Wurst, black bread and sausage, foods she had never eaten or seen prepared. She refused to wear the pink dress Sarah had selected, instead pointing to David's clothes and saying, "Wie Papa," like Papa. Most disturbing was Emma's reaction to her toys. She pushed aside the dolls and stuffed animals, showing interest only in David's toolbox and mechanical items around the house. She would hold wrenches and screwdrivers, with surprising familiarity, turning them over in her small hands as if remembering their purpose. "Maschinen," she said, picking up a screwdriver. "Ich arbeite mit Maschinen," machines. "I work with machines." The German words came naturally, without the hesitation typical of someone learning a foreign language. Emma spoke as if accessing familiar vocabulary, her pronunciation reflecting regional dialect that Sarah couldn't identify, but that sounded authentic and consistent. Throughout the day, Emma continued to correct anyone who called her by her given name. She would respond to Heinrich, but would ignore Emma entirely, as if the name held no meaning for her. When Sarah tried to engage her in typical toddler activities, Emma would shake her head and say, "Das ist für Kinder," that's for children, as if she were somehow above such pursuits. The most unnerving moment came during Emma's afternoon nap. Sarah found her daughter sitting up in bed, speaking in rapid German to someone who wasn't there. The conversation seemed urgent, with Emma's voice taking on the cadence of someone giving instructions or making important plans. "Die Fabrik ist nicht sicher," Emma said, her small hands gesturing emphatically. "Wir müssen gehen. Bevor sie kommen." The factory is not safe. We must go before they come. When Sarah entered the room, Emma looked up with eyes that seemed to hold knowledge far beyond her years. "Mama," she said, reverting to English but maintaining the German accent, "when I go back to Heinrich?" That evening, David and Sarah spent hours discussing what they had witnessed. Their 2-year-old daughter wasn't just playing pretend, she was exhibiting behaviors, knowledge, and linguistic abilities that suggested she was accessing memories of someone else's life, someone who had lived as a man in German-speaking Europe. The incident marked the beginning of a mystery that would consume the Fisher family and force them to confront questions about identity, memory, and the possibility that their daughters' consciousness contained echoes of a life lived nearly a century ago. Part 2. ESEALATION within days of the first incident. Emma's rejection of her female identity and her insistence on being called Heinrich became the defining characteristic of life in the Fisher household. What had initially seemed like a phase evolved into a complete transformation of their daughter's personality and behavior patterns. Emma began each day by announcing that she was Heinrich, speaking in German with increasing fluency and complexity. Her vocabulary expanded rapidly, including technical terms related to machinery and manufacturing that no 2-year-old should know. She would wake up speaking of Die Nachtschicht, the night shift, and Die Dampfmaschine, the steam engine, with the familiarity of someone discussing routine work, responsibilities. The physical changes were perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the escalation. Emma's mannerisms became distinctly masculine. She would spit like a man, scratch herself unconsciously, and adopt a swagger that seemed borrowed from someone much older and larger. She refused to sit with her legs together, instead adopting the wide-legged stance typical of working-class men from an earlier era. "Frauen sitzen so nicht," she would say when Sarah tried to correct her posture. "Männer sitzen stark." Women don't sit like this. Men sit strong. Emma's clothing preferences became a daily battle. She would throw tantrums when presented with dresses, insisting instead on wearing pants, suspenders, and shirts that approximated what she called Arbeitskleidung, work clothes. Sarah found herself shopping for toddler boys' clothing to accommodate her daughter's persistent demands. The escalation reached concerning levels when Emma began to exhibit knowledge of adult male activities and responsibilities. She would speak of supporting meine Frau, my wife, and caring for die Kinder, the children, describing domestic arrangements that suggested she had lived as a married man with family responsibilities. "Ich muss arbeiten," she would say, her small face serious with adult concern. "Mein family braucht Geld für Essen." I must work. My family needs money for food. These statements were delivered with the emotional weight of someone who had actually experienced the pressure of providing for dependents. Emma would become distressed when prevented from going to work, crying with the frustration of someone whose sense of identity was tied to their professional responsibilities. The Families' daily routines began to accommodate Emma's masculine persona. Sarah found herself addressing her daughter as Heinrich during the episodes, as it was the only way to maintain any meaningful communication. David began teaching Emma about tools and mechanical concepts, partly to understand her interests and partly to provide appropriate outlets for her fixations. Most disturbing was Emma's emotional response to her female body. She would look at herself in the mirror with confusion and distress, pointing to her reflection and saying, "Das ist falsch. This is wrong." She would become upset during diaper changes, seeming frustrated by the physical reality of her anatomy. "Whoa, ist mein ... she would ask, pointing to her genital area with the confusion of someone expecting different anatomy. The questions were heartbreaking to witness, as Emma seemed genuinely bewildered by her physical form. The escalation intensified when Emma began to display knowledge of specific historical events and cultural practices from 1920s Europe. She would speak of Die schlechten Zeiten, the bad times, and Die Männer Uniform, the men in uniforms, with the fearful recognition of someone who had lived through dangerous periods. "Sie nehmen die Fabriken," she would say, her voice filled with anxiety. "Sie nehmen die Arbeit von den Männern." They take the factories. They take the work from the men. Sarah and David began to realize that Emma's memories weren't just personal, but seemed to include awareness of broader historical and political events. She would speak of economic hardship, political instability, and social changes with the understanding of someone who had witnessed these developments firsthand. By April 2024, Emma's Heinrich persona had become so dominant that she would only respond to her birth name when severely distressed or frightened. The cheerful, playful toddler they had known was increasingly overshadowed by someone who seemed to carry the weight of adult male responsibilities and the memories of a life lived in a very different time and place. The family faced the difficult reality that their daughter was living primarily in the identity of someone else, someone who had apparently existed as a man in German-speaking Europe nearly a century ago. The escalation had reached a point where they needed to investigate further to understand what was happening to their child. Part 3. The Einvestiegereien faced with their daughter's complete transformation into a German-speaking male persona. Sarah and David began systematically researching the specific details Emma had been providing about Heinrich's life. They started by documenting her German vocabulary, her references to historical events, and her descriptions of daily life in what appeared to be 1920s Europe. Sarah's background in library science proved invaluable as she began researching German industrial history, focusing on the mechanical and manufacturing terms Emma used with such fluency. The child's technical vocabulary was remarkably sophisticated, including specific references to steam engines, factory operations, and manufacturing processes that were accurate to the early 20th century. David approached the investigation by analyzing Emma's mechanical knowledge. Despite being only 2 years old, she could identify tools, explain their functions, and describe manufacturing processes with accuracy that impressed his engineering colleagues. Her understanding of how machinery worked seemed to come from direct experience rather than learned knowledge. The breakthrough in their research came when Sarah began focusing on Emma's specific references to Die Fabrik am Fluss, the factory by the river. Emma had repeatedly mentioned this location, describing it as her workplace and expressing anxiety about dangerous men who had come there. The specificity of the reference suggested a real location rather than a generalized memory. Working with online databases and German historical archives, Sarah began searching for industrial facilities that matched Emma's descriptions. The child had mentioned specific details: a textile factory located beside a river, with steam-powered machinery, and employment conflicts that had occurred in the 1920s. The investigation led Sarah to the records of the Württemberg State Archives, which contained extensive documentation of industrial disputes and political unrest in southwestern Germany during the 1920s. Among these records, she found references to a textile factory in the town of Esslingen am Neckar that matched Emma's descriptions with startling accuracy. The Esslingen Textile Works had been a major employer in the region, located directly beside the Neckar River and powered by steam engines. Most significantly, the factory had been the site of violent labor disputes in 1923, when paramilitary groups had clashed with workers during a period of economic instability. David decided to research the surname Muller that Emma had consistently used when identifying herself as Heinrich. Given its commonness in German-speaking regions, he focused specifically on textile workers in Esslingen during the 1920s. The search proved challenging, as employment records from that period were often incomplete or had been destroyed during World War I. The breakthrough came when David contacted Dr. Klaus Weber, a historian at the University of Tübingen who specialized in German industrial history. Dr. Weber was intrigued by the specific details the Fischer family had documented and agreed to search his extensive collection of regional historical materials. May 10, 2024, Dr. Weber made a discovery that would change everything. In a collection of employment records from the Esslingen Textile Works, he found documentation of a worker named Heinrich Muller who had been employed at the factory from 1920 to 1923. The records indicated that Muller had been a skilled machine operator, married with 2 children, and had been involved in the labor disputes that had plagued the factory. Most significantly, the records showed that Heinrich Muller had disappeared during the violent confrontations of November 1923. Factory witnesses reported that he had been seen leaving work on the evening of November 15, 1923, but had never returned home. His wife had reported him missing, and local authorities had investigated, but no trace of him had ever been found. Dr. Weber's research revealed that Heinrich Muller's disappearance had occurred during a period of intense political violence in the region. Paramilitary groups had been targeting socialist workers and union organizers, and several factory employees had been attacked or had disappeared during this period. The historical documentation painted a picture of a man who matched Emma's descriptions perfectly. A skilled factory worker, a devoted family man, and someone who had lived through dangerous times before vanishing without explanation. The details of his life, his work, and his disappearance aligned with the memories Emma had been expressing with such emotional authenticity. Dr. Weber agreed to continue researching Heinrich Muller's case, searching for additional documentation about his life and the circumstances of his disappearance. The investigation had revealed that Emma's memories weren't just historically accurate. They were connected to a specific individual whose fate had remained unknown for over a century. Part 4. The Bearbeiter most stunning validation of Emma's memories came when Dr. Weber made a discovery that would fundamentally challenge everything the Fischer family thought they understood about their daughter's experiences. While researching Heinrich Muller's case in the Esslingen Municipal Archives, he found a collection of personal documents that had been preserved by the local historical society. Among these documents was a letter written by Heinrich Muller's wife, Anna, to the local police chief in December 1923. The letter, preserved in the police department's historical files, contained details about Heinrich's life that matched Emma's descriptions with chilling accuracy. Anna Muller had written, "Mein Mann war Maschinist in der Textilfabrik. A sprach oft von der Gefahr, die von den neuen politischen Gruppen ausging. In den letzten Wochen, vor seinem Verschwinden, war sehr besorgt, aber die Sicherheit der Fabrik unwarnte mich. Das wir vielleicht fliehen mussten." My husband was a machine operator in the textile factory. He often spoke of the danger from the new political groups. In the weeks before his disappearance, he was very concerned about the safety of the factory and warned me that we might have to flee. The letter perfectly matched Emma's anxious references to Die Fabrik ist nicht sicher. The factory is not safe, and her repeated warnings about dangerous men coming to the workplace. Dr. Weber's most significant discovery came when he found Heinrich Müller's employment file, which contained a photograph of the missing worker. The image showed a man in his 30s, wearing work clothes, with a serious expression and the distinctive posture Emma had been exhibiting. Wide stance, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders set with working-class confidence. When Dr. Weber showed the photograph to the Fisher family via video call, Emma's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. She looked at the image and began to cry, reaching toward the screen with recognition and profound sadness. Das bin ich, she whispered in German. Das ist Heinrich. Wo ist mein Anna? Wo sind mein Kinder? That's me. That's Heinrich. Where is my Anna? Where are my children? The emotional authenticity of Emma's response was undeniable. She spoke to the photograph as if recognizing herself, asking about family members with the grief of someone who had been separated from loved ones. Dr. Weber's continued research revealed additional details that validated Emma's memories. Heinrich Müller had indeed been married to a woman named Anna, and they had 2 children, a son named Karl and a daughter named Greta. The family had lived in a small apartment near the factory, and Heinrich had been known among his coworkers as a skilled and reliable employee. The breakthrough reached its climax when Dr. Weber discovered Heinrich Müller's personal effects, which had been preserved by the Historical Society after Anna's death in 1945. Among these items was a small notebook containing Heinrich's handwritten observations about factory operations, safety concerns, and his growing anxiety about political developments. The notebook entries, written in Heinrich's own hand, contained phrases and technical descriptions that Emma had been using with startling accuracy. Heinrich had written about Die Dampfmaschine matched seltsam Geräusch, the steam engine makes strange noises, and Die Arbeiter haben Angst vor den neuen Manieren, the workers are afraid of the new men. Exact phrases that Emma had been speaking during her episodes. Most remarkably, Heinrich's final notebook entry, dated November 14, 1923, the day before his disappearance, contained a passage that seemed to predict his fate. Ich spür, das etwas Schreckliches passieren wird. When mir etwas sust, hoff ich, das jemand meiner Family sagt, dass ich sie geliebt habe, und dass ich wirklich habe, ein guter Mann zu sein. I feel that something terrible will happen. If something happens to me, I hope someone will tell my family that I love them and that I tried to be a good man. The convergence of historical documentation, personal artifacts, and Emma's detailed memories created compelling evidence that the 2-year-old possessed authentic knowledge of Heinrich Müller's life and experiences. The investigation had revealed that Emma's memories weren't just historically accurate, they were the actual thoughts, concerns, and experiences of a man who had vanished without explanation in 1923. Dr. Weber arranged for the Fisher family to have access to all the historical materials he had discovered, including photographs, documents, and personal items that had belonged to Heinrich Müller. The breakthrough had provided undeniable validation of Emma's extraordinary claims about her previous identity. Part 5, the Sionfrontier, the story of Emma Fisher, gained international attention when Dr. Weber presented the case at the European Conference on Historical Consciousness in June 2024. The presentation, titled Identity Displacement in Contemporary Children, the Heinrich Müller case, sparked immediate controversy and attracted prominent skeptics from the fields of psychology, neuroscience, and historical research. Dr. Margaret Thornton, a leading child psychologist from Oxford University, publicly challenged the findings in a series of academic papers and media interviews. We're being asked to believe that a 2-year-old American girl has access to the memories of a German factory worker who disappeared a century ago, she argued. The more reasonable explanation is that the child has been exposed to German cultural content and is exhibiting a form of dissociative identity disorder. The confrontation intensified when Dr. Thornton arrived in Minneapolis with an international team of specialists to investigate what she called the Fisher family's extraordinary claims. The team included Dr. Antonio Rossi, a neuropsychologist specializing in childhood development, and Dr. Helena Kowalski, an expert in false memory formation. The investigation took place at the Fisher home on July 8, 2024. With extensive documentation to ensure scientific rigor, Dr. Thornton approached the meeting with obvious skepticism, immediately questioning the possibility that a toddler could possess authentic memories from another person's life. Children at this age are remarkably susceptible to suggestion and can develop elaborate fantasy identities, Dr. Thornton explained to the family. The German language abilities, the historical knowledge, the masculine behaviors, all of these can be explained through exposure to cultural content and unconscious parental reinforcement. The skeptical team began by examining the Fisher home for possible sources of German cultural information. They searched for books, internet content, television programs, or other materials that might have exposed Emma to the specific knowledge she had been demonstrating. Their investigation revealed minimal exposure to German culture. The family had no German heritage, owned no German language materials, and their media consumption showed no related content. The team was forced to acknowledge that conventional sources of cultural contamination were absent from Emma's environment. Dr. Rossi then conducted neurological tests to determine whether Emma's brain showed any abnormalities that might explain her unusual behaviors. The results were within normal parameters for a 2-year-old, showing no signs of neurological conditions that might account for her experiences. The confrontation reached its emotional climax when Dr. Thornton decided to test Emma's responses. Under controlled conditions, she presented the child with a mixture of accurate historical information and deliberate fabrications about Heinrich Müller's life, monitoring her reactions for signs of suggestibility. Emma's responses frustrated the skeptical team. She consistently rejected false information about Heinrich, correcting the fabrications with the confidence of someone defending their own identity. When Dr. Thornton claimed that Heinrich had worked in a shoe factory rather than a textile mill, Emma became agitated and insisted, "Nein, Textil, ich arbeite mit Stoff. No, textile. I work with fabric." The most dramatic moment came when Dr. Thornton challenged Emma directly about her identity. "Emma, you are a little girl. You are not Heinrich. Heinrich was a man who lived a long time ago." Emma's reaction was immediate and profound. She began to cry with the deep, soul-crushing grief of someone confronting existential loss. Her small body shook with sobs as she spoke in rapid German, her words tumbling out in desperate torrents. "Ich bin Heinrich. Ich bin ein Mann. Warum bin ich in diesem Körper? Wo ist mein Anna? Ich will nach Haus. I am Heinrich. I am a man. Why am I in this body? Where is my Anna? I want to go home." The intensity of Emma's emotional response affected everyone in the room. Dr. Kowalski, who had remained professionally detached throughout the investigation, found herself moved by the child's obvious distress. This level of emotional authenticity is extremely difficult to fabricate, she admitted. The child's grief appears genuine, and her linguistic abilities are remarkable. While I maintain skepticism about supernatural explanations, I must acknowledge that conventional theories don't adequately explain what we're observing. The confrontation concluded with Dr. Thornton's reluctant admission that the case presented genuine anomalies. "We came here expecting to find evidence of suggestion or neurological abnormalities," she said in her final statement. "While we cannot accept claims of reincarnation or consciousness transference, we must acknowledge that this child's experiences challenge our understanding of identity development and memory formation." The confrontation had failed to provide the definitive debunking that skeptics had hoped for, leaving the international scientific community divided about the nature of Emma's extraordinary experiences. The Fisher family was left to continue navigating the complex reality of raising a child who seemed to carry the memories and identity of a man who had vanished without explanation a century ago. Part 6. The After May Today. Emma Fisher is 4 years old, a complex child who has learned to navigate between two distinct identities, while her family continues to grapple with the profound questions raised by her extraordinary experiences. The intense episodes of being Heinrich have evolved into a more integrated existence, though the masculine persona remains a fundamental part of her psychological makeup. Sarah reports that Emma's dual identity has become more manageable over time. She's learned to be Emma when she needs to be, but Heinrich is always there, Sarah explains. She switches between them depending on the situation, like someone who speaks multiple languages. The family has worked extensively with Dr. Patricia Williams, a child psychologist who specializes in identity development and has experience with similar cases. Dr. Williams has helped Emma develop coping strategies for managing her dual consciousness, while ensuring healthy development of her contemporary identity. Emma represents a unique case of identity coexistence, Dr. Williams wrote in her 2024 study. Rather than complete identity replacement, she demonstrates the ability to access two distinct personality structures: her contemporary female identity and what appears to be the preserved consciousness of Heinrich Müller. Emma's German language abilities have continued to develop, though she now speaks both German and English fluently. Her vocabulary includes technical terms and regional dialect that linguists have confirmed are authentic to 1920s southwestern Germany. She often serves as an informal translator when the family encounters German-speaking visitors or media. The child has retained her mechanical interests and masculine mannerisms, though she has learned to modulate these behaviors in social situations. At home, she prefers boys' clothing and tools, but she can adapt to feminine expectations when necessary. Her teachers have learned to appreciate her unique perspective while ensuring she develops appropriate peer relationships. Dr. Weber continues to research Heinrich Müller's case, using Emma's memories to guide his historical investigations. Several of her recollections have led to new discoveries about the factory's operations, the political situation in 1920s Esslingen, and the broader context of Heinrich's disappearance. Emma's memories have provided insights into historical events that aren't documented in official records, Dr. Weber wrote in his recent publication. She has described worker meetings, political discussions, and social dynamics that help us understand the human experience of this turbulent period. The international academic community remains divided about the implications of Emma's case. Some researchers view it as evidence for consciousness survival or reincarnation, while others continue to search for conventional explanations. The debate has sparked new research into childhood, identity development, and the nature of memory formation. Emma herself has developed sophisticated understanding of her unique situation. She speaks of Heinrich as both herself and as someone else, acknowledging the complexity of her dual existence. "Heinrich is inside me," she told researchers during a recent interview. "He's sad because he can't go home, but he's happy because he's not gone forever." The family has connected with other parents whose children have experienced similar phenomena, forming a support network for families dealing with apparent past life memories. They've learned that Emma's case, while unique in its historical verification, shares common elements with hundreds of other documented instances worldwide. Last year, the Fisher family traveled to Germany, visiting Esslingen and the site where the textile factory once stood. Emma's reaction to the location was profound. She recognized the geography despite the modern changes, pointing to areas where buildings had once stood and describing the neighborhood as it had appeared in Heinrich's time. Das ist mean strange, she said, standing beside the Neckar River. Hier bin ich zur Arbeit gegangen. That's my street. I walked to work here. The visit provided both closure and continuation for Emma's connection to Heinrich's life. She was able to see the place where he had lived and worked, while also understanding that his time had passed and her life was in the present. Sarah and David have learned to embrace the mystery of their daughter's experiences while focusing on her current development and future possibilities. They've created a home environment that honors both Emma's contemporary identity and her connection to Heinrich's memories. We stopped trying to explain why this happened, David reflects. Instead, we focus on helping Emma use her experiences to understand the value of hard work, family loyalty, and social responsibility. Heinrich's memories have given her an unusual perspective on life, but they're also teaching her important lessons about resilience and human dignity. Emma continues to grow and develop as a unique individual who bridges past and present. Her story has become a testament to the enduring nature of human consciousness and the mysterious ways that identity can transcend the boundaries of time, gender, and individual lifetimes. She remains a living connection to Heinrich Müller's lost life, ensuring that his story is not forgotten and that his disappearance, while never fully explained, has gained new meaning through her memories. Her experiences have brought historical figures to life and have provided comfort to families dealing with similar phenomena. The mystery of Emma's dual identity remains unsolved, but her journey has contributed to a growing understanding of consciousness, memory, and the complex nature of human identity. Her case continues to challenge our assumptions about who we are and how our sense of self is formed and maintained across time. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Emma's story isn't the mystery of how she carries Heinrich's memories, but the possibility that identity itself might be more fluid than we imagine, that somewhere in the depths of consciousness, the boundaries between male and female, past and present, self and other, are not as fixed as we believe, and that sometimes, just sometimes, love and loss can be so powerful that they create bridges across the impossible gulf of time, allowing souls to find each other again in the most unexpected ways.